I sat frozen at that corner table, the glass of water trembling slightly in my hand. Around me, Hartley's continued its Thursday evening rhythm, the clink of silverware, low conversations, the occasional burst of laughter from the bar area. But in my corner, there was only silence and the weight of what had just happened. Derek's words hung in the air like smoke. "Nobody's going to take care of you anymore, Gerald. Figure it out." The hostess, a young woman named Courtney, approached hesitantly. "Mr. Pearson, is everything... Can I get you anything?" I looked up at her, and something in my expression must have shown the shock because her face crumpled with sympathy. She knew. Of course she knew. I'd hired her myself 2 months ago when Vernon told me they needed more front-of-house staff. But she didn't know that I knew, and the complexity of the moment made my head spin. "Just give me a minute," I managed. She nodded and retreated, but I caught her whispering urgently to Vernon, who stood near the kitchen entrance. His weathered face darkened when he looked toward the door where Derek had exited, then back to me. Vernon started walking over, and I held up my hand. Not yet. I needed to think. My phone buzzed. Melissa. "Dad, Derek said you two had a nice dinner. I'm so glad you're bonding. Love you." My throat tightened. She had no idea. My daughter, my beautiful, kind-hearted Melissa, who'd inherited her mother's gentle spirit and trusting nature, had no clue what kind of man she'd married. And that realization cut deeper than Derek's cruelty. I could call her right now, tell her everything, but what would that accomplish? She'd be devastated. She'd confront Derek. Their marriage, already strained from what I'd observed at Sunday dinners, would implode. And I'd be the catalyst, the bitter old man who couldn't handle a slight. Except this wasn't a slight. This was calculated humiliation. This was a man trying to break his father-in-law's spirit in a public place, banking on my pride keeping me silent. Vernon appeared at my table anyway, his bulk blocking the view from nearby diners. "Gerald," he said quietly, using my first name despite our agreement that he'd maintain professional distance in public. I had no idea he was planning. "Jesus, I'm sorry. If I'd known..." "You couldn't have known," I interrupted. "He called the reservation in under his company name, didn't he?" Vernon nodded grimly. "Prestige Properties, LLC, requested this specific table. Told Courtney no menus, just water, said it was some kind of business demonstration." He paused. "You want me to ban him? Say the word and he's out, permanently." I almost smiled at Vernon's fierce loyalty. "No, not yet, just let me sit here a while. I need to think." He squeezed my shoulder and left, and I turned to look out the window at downtown Akron's revitalized streets. This neighborhood had been dying 15 years ago. Abandoned factories, boarded storefronts, despair soaking into every brick. Now there were coffee shops, a craft brewery, young families pushing strollers, past murals and string lights. I'd been part of that transformation, my company renovating 3 historic buildings that anchored the revival. Janet used to say I had a gift for seeing potential where others saw ruin. "You don't just build buildings, Jerry," she'd told me on our 40th anniversary, her hand thin and papery in mine, the cancer already stealing her away. "You build futures. You give people hope. Promise me you won't stop doing that even when I'm gone." I'd promised, but sitting here now, I wondered if I'd kept that promise or just hidden from the world in grief. My phone rang. Derek. I stared at the screen, almost didn't answer. Then something, curiosity maybe, or the need to understand, made me press accept. "Gerald," his voice was smooth, unbothered. "I assume you figured out how to get home? There's a bus stop 2 blocks east. Route 47 runs until midnight." The casual cruelty of it stole my breath. "Why?" The word came out hoarse. "Why would you do this?" "Because you needed to understand your position." I heard ice clinking in a glass on his end. He was already somewhere else. Already celebrating. "You've been living in the past, old man. Janet's gone. Your company's gone. You're nobody now, just another retired guy, slowly dying in the suburbs. Melissa doesn't need you hovering around, and frankly, neither do I. We're building our own life, and we don't need you playing the patriarch, judging every decision we make." I never... "You don't have to say it. I see it in your eyes every Sunday, the disappointment, the way you look at our house, our choices, me. Well, here's the truth. Your opinion doesn't matter anymore. You have nothing I want, no business to hand down, no wisdom I need. You're a relic." The line went dead. I sat there, the phone against my ear, feeling something crack open inside my chest. Not just hurt, though God knows it hurt, but a terrible, clarifying anger. Not the hot rage of my younger years, when I'd gotten into shouting matches with subcontractors or difficult clients. This was colder, more focused. This was the anger of a man who'd been fundamentally misjudged. Vernon reappeared with a plate. Prime rib, asparagus, garlic mashed potatoes. The Thursday special I'd approved when we redesigned the menu. "On the house," he said firmly. "And before you argue, remember who signs my paychecks." I looked at the food, then at Vernon's defiant expression, and felt the tiniest crack in my despair. "Thank you, Gerald." Vernon sat down across from me, breaking every protocol. "I've known you since I was 16 years old, working summers for my old man. You gave him steady work when nobody else would hire a Mexican mason in 1982. You paid for his surgery when he broke his back on the Fletcher job. You came to his funeral and put money in my mama's hand for the burial. Your father was a good man," I said quietly. "Best craftsman I ever worked with." "And you're a good man," Vernon shot back. "Whatever that pendejo said to you, whatever he thinks he knows about you, he's wrong. You hear me? He's wrong." I wanted to believe him. But Derek's words had found their mark, settling into the doubts that had plagued me since Janet died. What was I now? Who was I without my wife, my company, my purpose? I ate slowly, each bite an act of defiance against Derek's assumption that I'd slink away broken. Other diners glanced over occasionally, and I wondered what they saw, just another old man eating alone, or something more. Did they notice my hands, still strong despite the age spots and prominent veins? Did they see the set of my shoulders, the way I'd learned to carry myself through 4 decades of dealing with difficult men in difficult situations? When I finished, Courtney brought coffee without asking. "Mr. Hartley said you might want this," she said softly. Then, even more quietly, "My grandpa's about your age. If someone treated him like that..." She trailed off, her young face fierce with second-hand anger. "Thank you, Courtney." I met her eyes. "But I'm all right, really." She didn't look convinced, but she nodded and left me with the coffee. I pulled out my phone and opened my photos. Janet smiled up at me from a picture taken at Melissa's wedding 4 years ago. God, she'd been beautiful even then, even with the cancer already growing inside her, though we didn't know it yet. She wore lavender, her favorite color, and her hand rested on my arm with casual intimacy born from 43 years of marriage. Derek stood on the other side of that photo, his arm around Melissa, his smile perfect and practiced. I'd had doubts even then, small things. The way he name-dropped clients, the slightly too expensive watch, the casual dismissal when Melissa mentioned wanting children. "We're focusing on our careers right now," he'd say, and Melissa would nod, but I'd seen the flicker of disappointment in her eyes. Janet had been more generous in her assessment. "Give him time, Jerry," she'd whispered during the reception. "Not everyone shows their heart right away. You didn't either, remember? My daddy thought you were a cocky punk when we started dating." I'd laughed because it was true. At 23, fresh from 2 years of construction work and convinced I could build an empire, I'd been all swagger and ambition. Janet's father, a Methodist minister, had seen right through me, but he'd also seen something worth nurturing, and he'd given me a chance to prove myself. Maybe that's what Derek needed, a chance. Maybe tonight was some misguided attempt to assert independence, to establish boundaries in the clumsiest way possible. Maybe, no. I stopped myself. That was excuse-making, the kind of rationalization that enabled bad behavior. Derek was 41 years old, a successful businessman by all accounts. He knew exactly what he was doing tonight. This wasn't immaturity, this was malice. The question was, what was I going to do about it? I could reveal my ownership of Hartley's, embarrass him publicly. The thought had a certain appeal, poetic justice, the humiliated becoming the humiliator. But even as I considered it, I heard Janet's voice again. "What you do with power says everything about who you are, Jerry." Or I could stay silent, let Derek think he'd won, and simply distance myself from my daughter's life, protect myself from further hurt. That was the easier path, the one that required nothing from me but withdrawal. But that meant abandoning Melissa, and I'd promised Janet I'd look after our girl, no matter what. The coffee grew cold as I sat there, wrestling with choices that all seemed to lead to pain. Finally, I signaled for the check, knowing Vernon wouldn't bring one but needing the ritual of asking. He came over instead. "Go home, Gerald, get some rest, and tomorrow, when you've had time to think, call me. We'll figure this out." I nodded, left 2 20s on the table despite his protests, and walked out into the October night. The air was crisp, carrying the smell of wood smoke from someone's fireplace. My Silverado sat in the parking lot where I'd left it, faithful and solid. But I didn't get in right away. Instead, I stood there, looking up at the building I owned, at the warm light spilling from the windows, at the carefully restored brick facade, at the sign Vernon and I had chosen together. This place represented everything I believed in, taking something broken and making it whole, investing in people and community, building something that would last. Derek thought I was nobody now. He thought retirement meant irrelevance, that without my company, I was just an old man waiting to die. He had no idea what I was capable of. My phone buzzed again. Melissa, this time calling. "Hey, sweetheart," I answered, keeping my voice steady. "Dad? Derek said you two had such a good talk. I'm so happy. I know he can be, well, he's not always great at expressing himself, but he really does respect you. He told me how much he appreciated you sharing your wisdom tonight about business and life and everything." I closed my eyes. Derek had already constructed his narrative, already fed Melissa a version of tonight that cast him as the dutiful son-in-law, seeking guidance from the wise elder. The lie was so smooth, so complete, that contradicting it would make me look confused at best, vindictive at worst. "I'm glad we talked too," I said carefully. It wasn't technically a lie. We had talked, just not the way she imagined. "See? I knew if you two just spent time together, you'd get along better. Maybe we can make it a monthly thing? Derek suggested it. He wants to learn from you, Dad, about integrity, about building something that lasts. He really looks up to you." The words were knives, each one finding a soft place to land. "We'll see, honey. I'm pretty tired tonight. Long day." "Of course. Get some rest. Love you, Dad." "Love you too, Melissa. More than you know." I hung up and stood there in the parking lot, understanding now the full scope of what I was dealing with. Derek wasn't just cruel, he was strategic. He'd humiliated me in a way designed to be invisible to everyone else, then immediately reframed the encounter to ensure Melissa's loyalty remained with him. This wasn't a one-time incident. This was a pattern, a glimpse into how he operated. And suddenly, a lot of small things from the past 4 years clicked into place. The way Melissa had stopped mentioning her job at the nonprofit after Derek suggested she could do better, the expensive renovations on their house that she'd seemed anxious about, the increasing rarity of her visits to my place, always with an excuse about Derek's demanding schedule. He was isolating her, slowly, methodically, wrapping her world tighter and tighter around himself, and I'd been too lost in my own grief to notice. I got in the truck, but instead of starting the engine, I sat in the darkness and made a decision. Not revenge. That wasn't who I was, wasn't who Janet had loved, wasn't who my faith called me to be. But I wouldn't be passive either. Wouldn't retreat into safe, wounded silence. I would respond, carefully, wisely, and with the patience I'd learned from 40 years of building things that lasted. I'd figure out who Derek really was, what he wanted, and why he'd targeted me with such venom. And then I'd do what I'd always done best. Take a broken situation and find a way to make it whole, even if it cost me everything. I started the truck and drove home through quiet suburban streets, past houses where families sat watching television, eating dinner, living ordinary lives. My house waited at the end of Maple Street, dark except for the porch light I'd forgotten to turn off that morning. Inside, the silence was absolute. I'd grown accustomed to it over the past 18 months, but tonight it felt different, heavier, more aware. I walked through the living room where Janet's reading chair still sat by the window, past the kitchen where we'd shared 10,000 meals, up the stairs to the bedroom we'd shared for 43 years. Her side of the closet still held her clothes. I couldn't bring myself to donate them yet. I sat on the edge of the bed and finally let myself feel it. All of it. The humiliation, the anger, the profound loneliness of being dismissed by someone who should have treated me with respect, even if not love. But beneath those feelings, something else was growing. A determination I recognized from my younger days when I'd face down a project that everyone said was impossible and find a way to make it work anyway. Derek had made a critical mistake tonight. He'd assumed I was weak because I was grieving, irrelevant because I was retired, powerless because I was old. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in my home office, the room Janet had insisted I set up after I retired. So you'll have somewhere to think? And I thought harder than I had in 3 years. By dawn, I had a plan. Not revenge, I kept reminding myself, but truth and protection for Melissa. The first call I made was at 7:30 Friday morning to Casey Brennan, my attorney for the past 28 years. He answered on the second ring, his voice sharp despite the early hour. "Gerald Pearson, it's been too long. What's going on? I need you to pull everything you can find on Derek Mitchell. Financial records, business dealings, lawsuits, liens, anything public, and I need it quietly." Casey was silent for a moment. "This is about Melissa's husband." "Yes." "You sure you want to go down this road?" I thought about Melissa's voice on the phone last night, so eager to believe Derek's lie, so invested in the fantasy of a happy family. "I need to know who my daughter married, that's all, just information." "I'll have something by Monday," Casey said. "And Gerald, be careful. These things have a way of getting complicated." The weekend crawled by. I went to church Sunday morning, First Methodist, where Janet and I had attended for 37 years. Reverend Patricia Matthews, who'd eulogized my wife with such grace, found me afterward in the fellowship hall, nursing coffee I didn't want. "Gerald, you look troubled." She was 63, sharp-eyed, and had known me too long for pretense. "Just wrestling with something," I admitted. "Want to talk about it?" I almost said no, but something about the quiet concern in her face, the memory of how she'd sat with Janet during those final hospital days, made me open up. Not everything, not the ownership of Hartley's or my plan, but enough. The dinner, Derek's words, the lie he'd told Melissa. Patricia listened without interrupting, her coffee growing cold in her hands. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "What does your heart tell you to do?" she finally asked. "My heart wants to protect my daughter, but I don't know how to do that without destroying her marriage." "Maybe," Patricia said carefully. "The marriage is already damaged. Maybe you're just refusing to ignore what's been there all along." Her words stayed with me through Sunday dinner. Melissa and Derek came over as they did every week. I watched Derek carefully now, seeing things I'd missed before. The way he interrupted Melissa mid-sentence, the subtle put-downs disguised as jokes, the way he checked his phone constantly, barely engaging with the meal she'd spent an hour preparing in my kitchen. "This pot roast is a little dry, babe," he said, not looking up from his screen. "Maybe less time in the oven next week?" Melissa's face fell slightly. "I followed Mom's recipe exactly. Well, Janet had a gift for cooking. Not everyone does." He said it lightly, smiled even, but the message was clear. "You're not as good as she was." I set down my fork carefully, fighting the urge to say something. Melissa was watching me, and I forced a smile. "Tastes perfect to me, honey. Just like your mother's." She brightened, but Derek's eyes met mine across the table. In them, I saw calculation and something else, a challenge. He knew what he was doing. He wanted me to react, to be the unreasonable father who couldn't accept his daughter's husband. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. Monday morning, Casey called at 8. "You need to come to my office, today." His tone made my stomach drop. "That bad?" "Just come, 10 o'clock. Casey's office occupied the third floor of a restored building downtown, one I'd renovated back in 2003. His conference room overlooked the street, and spread across the mahogany table were documents that would change everything. "Derek Mitchell," Casey began, sliding a folder toward me, "is in serious financial trouble, has been for at least 2 years, maybe longer. He's leveraged to the hilt. Mortgaged that house you helped them with the down payment on, took out business loans he can't service, maxed out credit cards. He's currently being sued by 3 former clients for misrepresentation, and the state licensing board has an open investigation into his business practices." I stared at the papers, my hands numb. Melissa doesn't know any of this. I'd bet money she doesn't. He's good at maintaining appearances, expensive car, nice suits, the right restaurants, all of it built on debt and schemes that are starting to collapse. Casey pulled out another document. "And here's the interesting part. 2 months ago, he tried to take out a loan using your name as a guarantor, forged your signature on the application. The air left my lungs. What? The bank caught it. They called to verify, got your voicemail, left a message. You probably deleted it thinking it was spam. When they couldn't reach you, they denied the loan. But Gerald, this is fraud, criminal fraud. I sat back, the implications washing over me. Derek hadn't just been cruel at that dinner. He'd been desperate, and desperation made people dangerous. There's more, Casey said quietly. I have a contact at Family Services. Off the record, she told me there was a domestic disturbance call to their address 8 months ago. Neighbor reported shouting, something breaking. Police responded, no charges filed. Melissa told them everything was fine. My vision actually blurred. He's hurting her? I don't know, maybe just intimidating her. But Gerald, you need to understand what you're dealing with. This isn't just a guy who said some mean things at dinner. This is someone who's cornered, who's losing control of his life, and who sees you as an obstacle. I drove home in a daze, Casey's words echoing in my head. At a red light on Market Street, I pulled out my phone and texted Melissa, "Can you come by the house this week? Just you. Want to talk?" Her response came quickly. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine. Just want to catch up with my girl. Derek and I could come tonight?" "Just you this time, honey." A longer pause, then, "Okay. Wednesday, 2 p.m. Perfect." That night, I couldn't eat. I kept seeing Melissa's face when Derek had criticized her cooking, the way she'd automatically diminished herself. I thought about Janet, about how fiercely she'd loved our daughter, how she'd made me promise to look after her. I'd failed. I'd been so lost in grief that I'd let Melissa drift into a marriage with a man who was not only cruel, but criminal. A man who'd forged my signature, who'd isolated my daughter, who might be hurting her in ways I couldn't see. The next morning, Tuesday, I drove to Hartley's at 6 a.m. before they opened. Vernon was already there, prepping for the day. "I need to tell you something," I said, and laid out everything Casey had found. Vernon's face darkened as he listened. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to talk to Melissa, tell her the truth about who she married, give her the information she needs to make her own choices." "And if she doesn't believe you? If she chooses him anyway?" It was the question I'd been avoiding. "Then at least she'll know the truth, and I'll be there when she needs me." Vernon nodded slowly. "You're a better man than me." I'd want to break his jaw. "So would I admitted. "But that's not who I am anymore." Maybe never really was, underneath it all. Wednesday afternoon, Melissa arrived at 2 exactly. She looked tired, I noticed. Shadows under her eyes that makeup didn't quite hide. She wore a pale blue sweater I'd never seen before, high-necked despite the mild October weather. "Hi, Dad." She hugged me, and I held on maybe a second longer than usual, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo, the same brand Janet had used. We sat in the living room, and I brought tea. She cradled the mug like she was cold. "So what's this about?" she asked, trying for lightness but not quite achieving it. I'd rehearsed this moment 100 times, but now that it was here, the words felt impossible. "How do you tell your daughter that her marriage is built on lies, that the man she loves is dangerous?" "Melissa, I need to talk to you about Derek." Her face closed immediately. "Dad, please don't. I know you two don't always see eye to eye, but after your dinner last week..." "That dinner didn't happen the way he told you it did." She blinked. "What?" And I told her. Everything. The water, the humiliation, Derek's phone call afterward. I watched her face cycle through disbelief, confusion, anger. "That's not... Dad, that doesn't make sense. Why would he..." "Because he's desperate, honey." I slid Casey's folder across the coffee table. "I had my attorney look into his business. I need you to read this." "You investigated my husband?" Her voice rose. "You had no right..." "I had every right to protect my daughter." I kept my voice gentle but firm. "Just read it, please." She opened the folder reluctantly, and I watched her face as she read. Confusion gave way to shock, then something that looked like recognition, as if pieces were finally falling into place. "He forged your signature," she whispered, staring at the loan application. "Yes. He's being sued. Multiple times." "Yes." She looked up at me, and I saw tears forming. "The house. He said we needed to refinance for a better rate, but we just bought it 2 years ago. I didn't understand why, but he said I didn't understand real estate. He's drowning in debt," I said quietly. "And I think he saw me, saw my money, my property, my resources, as a way out." Melissa stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. Why didn't you tell me you were investigating him? Why did you go behind my back? Because I needed to know the truth before I said anything. I needed to be sure. You should have trusted me. I'm not a child, Dad. I'm 40 years old. You're right, I admitted. And I'm sorry for that part. But Melissa, I need you to hear this. I think he's been manipulating you, isolating you. The domestic disturbance call. She spun around. Nothing happened. I dropped a vase, the neighbors overreacted, the police came and left. It was nothing. But you didn't tell me about it. Because it was embarrassing and meaningless, and she stopped, her hand going to her throat to that high collar. You think he hurt me? It wasn't a question. I stood slowly. Did he? No, God, no. Derek would never. He's just stressed, Dad. The business has been difficult and he gets frustrated sometimes, but he's never. Her voice cracked. He loves me. I know he does, in his way. But love doesn't excuse fraud. It doesn't excuse forging signatures or lying to you about your financial situation. Melissa, you have a right to know who you're married to. She grabbed her purse, the folder still open on the table. I need to go. I need to think. Honey, wait. No, Dad. You've given me a lot to process. I need some time. She left and I stood at the window watching her car disappear down Maple Street. I'd done it, told her the truth, given her the information, but I had no idea if it would be enough. The rest of Wednesday passed in anxiety. I tried to read, couldn't. Tried to watch television, couldn't focus. At 9 p.m., my phone rang. Melissa. Dad. Her voice was thick with tears. Can I come home? Just for tonight? Of course. Always. She arrived 20 minutes later with a small overnight bag. Her eyes were red, swollen. We didn't talk much. I just made up the guest room, the one that had been hers growing up, and brought her the chamomile tea Janet always made when Melissa was upset. He denied everything, she said finally, sitting on the edge of the bed. I showed him the papers, and he said you fabricated them because you never accepted him. He said you were a bitter old man trying to destroy our marriage because you couldn't stand to see me happy without Mom. The words hit hard, but I kept my face neutral. What do you think? I think, she started crying again. I think I've known something was wrong for a long time. I just didn't want to see it. The money problems, the mood swings, the way he makes me feel small. But I kept thinking it was temporary, that if I was just patient enough, understanding enough, it would get better. I sat beside her, putting my arm around her shoulders like I had when she was little, and came to me with scraped knees and hurt feelings. I don't know what to do, she whispered. You don't have to decide anything tonight, just rest. Tomorrow we'll figure out next steps together. She fell asleep in her childhood bed, and I sat in the hallway outside her room for a long time, remembering all the nights Janet and I had done the same thing when she was small, listened to her breathe, grateful beyond words that she was safe. The next morning, Thursday, exactly 1 week after Derek's calculated cruelty at Hartley's, Melissa and I sat at the kitchen table over coffee and made a plan. She'd go back to the house, confront Derek one more time with the evidence, give him a chance to be honest. If he continued to lie, she'd move back home temporarily while she figured out her next steps. I might need a lawyer, she said quietly. If we separate, if we divorce. Casey's already offered to help, pro bono. She managed a small smile. You've thought of everything. I've had a lot of practice solving problems, honey. This one just matters more than any building I ever constructed. That afternoon, Melissa went home. I waited by the phone, anxious, praying in a way I hadn't since Janet's final days. At 6 p.m., she called. He admitted it, all of it. The debt, the forgery, everything. He said he was going to tell me eventually, that he just needed time to fix it. And then he said, her voice broke. He said if I left him, he'd make sure everyone knew what a disloyal wife I was, that he'd ruin my reputation, make it impossible for me to work in this city again. Melissa, I'm coming to get the rest of my things now, Dad. I'm done. She arrived an hour later, Derek following in his BMW, apparently determined to have the last word. I met them in the driveway as Melissa loaded boxes into her car. Derek approached me, his face twisted with rage. This is your fault. You poisoned her against me. You couldn't stand that she chose me, could you? Pathetic old man clinging to his dead wife's memory. That's enough. My voice was quiet, but carried weight. Vernon had taught me that, how to command a room without shouting. Melissa made her own choice based on the truth you tried to hide. Truth? He laughed bitterly. You want truth? Fine. I never loved her. I married her because I thought you'd hand over your fortune, that I'd be set for life. But you're just a washed-up contractor with a dead wife and nothing to offer. You're nobody. The words should have hurt. A week ago, they might have destroyed me. But standing there in my driveway, my daughter safe behind me, I felt something else entirely. Pity. You're wrong, I said simply. I'm somebody's father. I'm part of a community. I'm a man who builds things that last, and you're a man who tears things down for temporary gain. I know which one I'd rather be. Derek started toward me, fists clenched, and for a moment I thought he might actually swing. But Melissa stepped between us. Leave, Derek, now, or I call the police. He looked at her, seemed about to say something, then thought better of it. He got in his BMW and peeled out, leaving rubber on the street. Melissa and I stood there in the fading October light, neither of us speaking. Finally, she said, I'm sorry, Dad, for not seeing it sooner, for defending him, for... Stop. I pulled her into a hug. You have nothing to apologize for. You loved someone and gave them your trust. That's not weakness. That's courage. She cried against my shoulder, and I held her like I had 39 years ago when she was born, when Janet had placed her in my arms, and I'd made an unspoken vow to protect this small, perfect person forever. The next weeks were difficult. Divorce proceedings started. Derek made good on his threat to spread lies, telling anyone who'd listen that Melissa had abandoned him for no reason, that I'd manipulated her. Some people believed him. But more people didn't, especially after word spread, I never found out how, about what had happened at Hartley's. Vernon swore he didn't tell anyone, but Courtney had a big family and a bigger heart, and these things have a way of getting out. The community rallied around Melissa. Her old job at the nonprofit welcomed her back. Friends she'd lost touch with during the marriage reached out, and slowly, painfully, she began rebuilding. 3 months later, on a January morning when ice coated the trees and the world looked clean and new, Melissa and I stood in Hartley's dining room. Vernon had set up a corner table for us, not the one where Derek had humiliated me, but one by the window overlooking the street. So this is really yours? Melissa asked, looking around at the polished wood, the warm lighting, the families enjoying Saturday breakfast. Really mine. Bought it about a month before. Everything happened. Why didn't you tell me? I thought about that question. Because it wasn't about proving anything to Derek. It was about having a purpose again, a project, something to build. I paused. Your mother used to say I needed to keep creating things or I'd shrivel up inside. She was right. Melissa smiled, and I saw Janet in that smile, the same warmth, the same resilient joy. She was always right. Usually, I agreed. Vernon brought us coffee and the best cinnamon rolls in Akron. His abuela's recipe, he claimed. We ate slowly, talking about small things. Melissa's new apartment, a painting class she'd started, the way the light hit the snow outside. We didn't talk about Derek, who'd declared bankruptcy and left town. We didn't talk about the divorce that would be final in another month. We didn't talk about pain or betrayal or the year that had tested us both. Instead, we talked about the future, about Melissa's idea to start a foundation helping women escape difficult marriages, about the community center I was considering funding on the east side, about the garden she wanted to plant at my house in the spring with Janet's favorite flowers, lavender and white roses. You know what I realized? Melissa said, setting down her coffee. Derek called you nobody, but you're the opposite. You're deeply, fundamentally somebody, to this whole city, to Vernon and Courtney and everyone whose lives you've touched, to me. She reached across the table, took my weathered hand in her younger, softer one. You're my hero, Dad. My example of what real strength looks like. My throat tightened. I just did what any father would do. No, you did what you would do. You investigated when you needed to protect me. You told me the truth when it was hard. You let me make my own choices even when you were scared. And you never once said, I told you so, or made me feel stupid for not seeing who Derek was sooner. That's not any father, that's you. Through the window, I could see downtown Akron waking up. joggers, dog walkers, young families heading to the farmer's market. Janet and I had raised Melissa in this city, built a life here, invested our hearts in this community. And now, even without her, the investment was paying dividends I'd never expected. Your mother would be proud of you, I said. The way you've handled this, the strength you've shown. She'd be proud of both of us, Melissa countered. And she'd probably tell you to stop moping around that big house and start living again. I am living. I'm sitting here with my daughter, eating Vernon's grandmother's cinnamon rolls, planning community centers. What more could I want? Maybe someone to share it with? Melissa suggested gently. I'm not saying tomorrow or next month, but Dad, you're 71, not 91. You've got a lot of life left. Mom would want you to be happy. I thought about that, about the loneliness of the house on Maple Street, about Sunday dinners that could be more than just Melissa and me, about the possibility of companionship, maybe even love, in whatever years I had left. We'll see, I said. First, let's get you settled, then we'll worry about my social life. She laughed and the sound filled the restaurant, turning heads. People smiled, responding to the pure joy in it. We finished breakfast and walked out together into the January morning. The cold bit at my face, but I didn't mind. I felt more alive than I had in 3 years, more purposeful, more connected to the world around me. Derek had tried to break me with his cruelty, to reduce me to nothing with his words. But he'd miscalculated in every possible way. He'd assumed weakness where there was only grief waiting to transform into strength. He'd assumed isolation where there was community. He'd assumed defeat where there was only resilience, tested and proven over 71 years of living. As Melissa and I stood on the sidewalk outside Hartley's, I looked up at the building I owned, at the people inside sharing meals and conversations and small moments of ordinary grace. This was what I built, not just brick and mortar, but connection. Not just businesses, but purpose. Not just wealth, but meaning. And in the end, that made me somebody indeed. Ready to head home? Melissa asked. I smiled, thinking of the warm house waiting, of the foundation we'd start planning, of the garden we'd plant in spring, of the future spreading out before us like fresh snow waiting for footprints. Yeah, I said, let's go home. We walked to our cars, and I watched her drive away, safe, strong, free. And I felt Janet's presence like a warm hand on my shoulder, her voice in my ear. Well done, Jerry. Well done. I got in my truck and drove slowly through the streets. I'd known my entire adult life, past buildings I'd constructed and neighborhoods I'd helped revitalize, past the church where I'd married Janet and later buried her, past the hospital where Melissa was born. This was my city, my life, my legacy. And Derek Mitchell, wherever he was, whatever he thought he'd accomplished with his cruelty, he'd never understand what it meant to build something real, to be rooted in community and family and faith, to be fundamentally and unshakably somebody who mattered. The sun broke through the January clouds as I pulled into my driveway, casting long shadows across the snow. Inside, the house waited. Not empty anymore, not a mausoleum, but a home again. A place where Melissa would come for Sunday dinners, where friends would gather, where life would continue in all its messy, beautiful complexity. I stood at my front door, key in hand, and breathed in the cold air. Somewhere, I knew Janet was smiling, and somewhere inside me, beneath the grief and the scars and the hard-won wisdom of 71 years, I was smiling too. I'd been tested, I'd been hurt, I'd been called nobody, but I'd emerged on the other side knowing exactly who I was. Gerald Pearson, builder, father, man of faith and principle.